Year 112 AD. The outskirts of Rome. A female slave has just been captured after 3 days of running. 3 days where she tasted something she was never supposed to have. Freedom. The guards drag her back through the streets to a small workshop at the edge of the estate. Inside, an imperial official called a stigmata, a professional slave marker, is already heating iron rods and burning coals. Red-hot iron is pressed against her forehead. The sound cuts through the air, metal searing into skin. The smell of burning human flesh fills the room. She screams, but no one stops the procedure. When the iron is finally pulled away, 3 Latin letters remain burned into her flesh. FVG, fugitiva, runaway, a permanent mark visible to everyone for the rest of her life. This wasn't considered a crime by Roman standards. This was standard legal procedure, a practice so routine that Rome assigned specialized government officials to perform it. Welcome to the punishment system for fugitive female slaves of the Roman Empire. I'm Crown and Dagger. This channel exists to show you history without filters. Today you're going to discover what Seneca, Tacitus, and Suetonius actually wrote about what happened to female slaves who tried to escape. Details they documented without censorship. The brutal reality that Gladiator and HBO's Rome carefully edited out 5 punishments, 5 different ways Rome destroyed women who dare to seek freedom. More than 30% of Rome's population were slaves. Millions of men, women, and children. Female slaves were prisoners of war. Daughters born to slave mothers. Women kidnapped by pirates. Under Roman law, they weren't considered persons. The legal term was res things, objects with economic value, but without human rights. A Roman master could do essentially anything to a female slave without legal consequences. No trial, no appeal, no intervention. When she tried to escape, Roman law provided her owner with a menu of codified punishment options. And everything was documented, recorded, and archived with cold bureaucratic precision. Everyone knows Spartacus, but nobody knows what Rome did to women who tried the same thing. If you want history without filters, hit like and subscribe right now. Let me show you what really happened. The first and most permanent punishment was branding with hot iron, marking her forever as fugitiva. This wasn't symbolic. This was deliberate, painful, permanently disfiguring procedure designed to shame, control, and identify. The branding was burned into the forehead, making concealment impossible. The marks displayed FVG, short for fugitiva. Some brands carried full inscriptions like Ten Minugium hold me lest I flee. To be marked meant being transformed into a public spectacle. The brand served as permanent warning to every other enslaved person. Branded women could never move freely among Roman citizens. The procedure was often carried out publicly in marketplaces or town squares, frequently accompanied by verbal humiliation or beatings before and after the burning. The smell alone served as psychological warfare. Other slaves forced to witness the branding would remember that odor for the rest of their lives. The scent of burning human skin mixed with charred hair. It was designed to haunt them. Some women tried to cover the brands with cloth or cosmetics afterward. When discovered, they were branded again, this time on both cheeks. The second branding was done deeper, ensuring the scar tissue would be raised and impossible to hide. Repeat offenders received brands on their hands, making even basic tasks a public reminder of their attempted escape. The iron was heated until it glowed white-hot, hot enough that the flesh would cook instantly rather than just burn. This prevented bleeding but ensured maximum tissue destruction. The stigmata would hold the iron pressed against the skin for a full count of 10. You could hear the sizzle. You could see the smoke rising from a wound. The physical pain was excruciating, but it was eclipsed by lasting psychological destruction. In Roman society, a woman's appearance was tightly controlled. To bear a disfiguring burn mark meant being cast out of even the lowest semblance of dignity. The Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarum, a catalog of Roman inscriptions, includes actual slave collars recovered by archaeologists. One found in Rome reads Machivia, hold me because I flee. These weren't literary inventions. These were real objects locked around real human necks. Another highly visible punishment was being chained at the Janua, the main entrance of a Roman household. This carried deep symbolic weight. The main entrance was where private household met public street, the most visible point of property. To be chained there meant becoming part of the architecture itself, not as a person, but as a living deterrent. She would be fastened with iron shackles to a column or wall, sometimes both hands chained, sometimes forced to stand for extended periods. Maximum visibility to everyone passing by, neighbors, visitors, merchants, other slaves. For enslaved women, this carried additional layers of humiliation. Romans held deeply gendered views about honor and shame. A woman's exposure to constant public gaze, especially in physical restraint or partial undress, was itself considered violence and degradation. Chained women were frequently denied basic necessities for extended periods. Accounts from Plutus mention slaves denied food and forced to endure public humiliation for days. The chains weren't just restraints. They were designed to inflict ongoing pain. The iron manacles were deliberately sized too small, cutting into wrists and ankles. Over hours and days, the metal would erode through skin, then into muscle tissue. Infections were common. Some women lost fingers or toes to gangrene from the constricted blood flow. Weather offered no mercy. Chained women stood through scorching Mediterranean heat and winter rains. No shelter was provided. Their skin would blister and peel from sun exposure. In winter, some developed frostbite on exposed extremities. The intent was complete exposure to the elements and to public view. Passers-by were encouraged to participate in the humiliation. Children threw rotting food. Merchants spat as they passed. Other slaves were sometimes ordered by their masters to verbally abuse the chained woman, forced to participate in her degradation to demonstrate their own obedience. Refusal meant joining her. This wasn't isolated punishment. It was integrated into normal Roman daily life. Being made into an object at the threshold between private and public was among the most psychologically crushing penalties available. A silent message delivered in iron. Pause here. 2 punishments down, both designed to humiliate, control, destroy. Which was worse? Comment. Now, what comes next is where Rome stopped pretending this was about justice. Among the most brutal punishments was forced participation in arena executions. Rome used these spaces for public executions designed as mass entertainment. Escaped female slaves could be condemned to die in these arenas, not as trained combatants, but as victims. The punishment was damnatio bestas, condemnation to the beasts. This judicial penalty was used for serious crimes, including desertion, theft, rebellion, or repeated escape. Since enslaved individuals had no legal personhood, escape was viewed as fundamentally subversive, an attack on Roman social order itself. Women who fled and were captured could be handed over to arena games as expendable bodies to be destroyed for public entertainment. These executions were carefully crafted to maximize spectacle. Victims were exposed to wild animals, bears, lions, leopards, while unarmed and sometimes chained to posts. Some were burned alive, others killed through elaborate theatrical reenactments of myths. Others forced to fight one another with minimal weapons purely for crowd amusement. They weren't trained. Their deaths were intended and expected. There was no possibility of victory, no chance of survival, no hope of mercy. The animals used in these executions were deliberately starved for days beforehand. Roman bestiary animal handlers kept detailed records of feeding schedules to ensure maximum aggression. A hungry bear was more likely to attack immediately. A starved lion would tear into flesh rather than deliver a quick killing bite. The goal wasn't just death. It was prolonged visible suffering. Women condemned to the arena were sometimes sent out completely exposed before the crowd, adding public degradation to physical terror. The crowd's reaction was documented by historians. Cheers, jeers, betting on how long she would last. Marshall wrote about spectators wagering on whether the victim would scream or stay silent. Human death had become a gambling opportunity. The cleanup between executions was its own horror. Arena slaves called arena leotinari used hooks to drag torn bodies across the sand, leaving blood trails. Body parts were collected in baskets. The sand was rad, but never fully cleaned. Dry blood mixed with fresh blood, layer upon layer. By the end of a day's games, the arena floor was soaked through with layers of blood and sand. For enslaved women, cruelty was compounded by deliberate spectacle. They were displayed in ways calculated to humiliate. Female captives were sometimes cast as sacrificial figures in themed performances, blurring legal punishment and theatrical entertainment. For a Roman audience, this wasn't simply justice. This was deterrence through spectacle, social control through terror. The message was unmistakable. The enslaved body belonged absolutely to master and state. Rebellion could lead to the most humiliating and public death imaginable. These women were transformed into warnings, silenced through blood and applause. Physical punishment took another common form, systematic whipping and flogging. In ancient Rome, the whip wasn't merely an instrument for pain. It was a symbol of ownership and absolute discipline. Roman law gave slave owners complete authority. Flight was grave offense, and whipping with a flam, a multi-thonged whip weighted with metal or bone, was preferred punishment. The flag room could tear flesh, break bones, and cause injuries lasting months or resulting in permanent disability. Punishment could be administered privately or in public spaces, where screams would echo as warnings. The number of lashes was not regulated. No court intervention required. No outside authorities set limits. A slave owner could punish a runaway as harshly as he saw fit. In practice, this meant essentially unlimited cruelty. The flam's design was engineered for maximum damage. Each leather thong was embedded with small pieces of metal, bone, or glass. When the whip struck flesh, these fragments would catch and tear. A single lash could open wounds several inches long. Repeated strikes didn't just bruise. They stripped flesh from bone, exposing muscle and sometimes internal organs. Severe whippings often resulted in permanent disability. Women who received hundreds of lashes suffered spinal damage from the repeated impacts. Some lost the ability to walk. Others developed infections that spread to internal organs. The most brutal whippings were death sentences disguised as punishment designed to kill slowly over days through blood loss, infection, or organ failure. The aftermath was deliberately left visible. Masters would prohibit treatment of whipping wounds for days or weeks. The woman would be forced to continue working with her back shredded and bleeding, unable to lean back or lie down without excruciating pain. The wounds would attract flies. Infection would set in. The smell of rotting flesh served as yet another warning to other slaves. For women, punishment often included deliberate acts of public degradation designed to strip away dignity and identity. After severe whipping, the woman might be left in collapse with torn and blood-soaked garments deliberately left in view. In extreme cases, she would be displayed in communal areas where other enslaved people could see the results. In Roman literature, beatings are casually referenced as everyday occurrences. Writers like Horace, Juvenal, and Petronius mention whipping in routine terms, reflecting a world where brutal punishment was neither rare nor morally questioned. The whip represented the complete power imbalance at the heart of Roman slavery. Among the most feared punishments was deportatio in Matallum, deportation to the mines. For enslaved women who attempted to flee, this penalty was effectively a slow death sentence through forced labor under conditions designed to kill. The punishment of damnatio in Matallum was legally codified in Roman law and considered one of the most extreme forms of penal servitude. Mines in Roman provinces like Narcum, Data, and Sardinia were notorious for absolutely lethal working environments. Air underground choked with dust and toxic particles. Ventilation nearly non-existent. Tunnel collapse a constant risk. Enslaved laborers worked in narrow shafts barely large enough to move, carrying out backbreaking work with primitive tools, constantly exposed to toxic elements like mercury, lead, and arsenic. For women, the experience was especially harrowing. They were subjected to the same grueling tasks as men, hauling stones, crushing or clearing debris, but with added vulnerabilities in completely male-dominated environment. Abuse by guards was rampant. No oversight, no protection from assault, no possibility of return to the surface. The mercury exposure in Roman mines caused specific documented horrors. Workers' teeth would fall out. Their gums would rot. They would develop tremors that made even basic movements impossible. But they were still forced to work. Some lost their minds completely. Mercury poisoning caused hallucinations, paranoia, violent outbursts. These mad miners were chained in deeper shafts and left to die in the darkness. Tunnel collapses were so common that Roman mine administrators stopped attempting rescues. When a shaft collapsed, the workers trapped inside were simply written off on the ledges. Their screams could sometimes be heard through the rock for hours or days as they slowly suffocated in the darkness. New slaves would be sent to dig a different tunnel, stepping over the sealed tomb of those who came before. Bodies weren't removed from the mines. When a worker died, and they died constantly, their corpse was dragged to a side shaft and left to decompose. The smell in the deeper tunnels was overwhelming. A mix of human waste, rotting flesh, toxic mineral dust, and stagnant water. Some miners went blind from working in absolute darkness. Others developed lung diseases that drowned them slowly in their own fluids while they were still forced to swing picks. The sentence was almost always lifelong. Very few survived long enough for release. Death from exhaustion, starvation, injuries, or disease was common and expected. Unlike visible punishments like branding, deportation of mines was deliberately concealed. It was punishment through erasure. A fugitive woman sent to the mines was not meant to be seen again. Her suffering occurred in complete darkness, but it was no less real, more total, and more hopeless. The mines represented the final stage of Roman control. Once sent there, you ceased to exist in any social sense. You became a number in a production ledger, a unit of labor to be used until complete physical breakdown. So, what did the historians of that era actually think? They documented everything, but their tone reveals acceptance. Suetonius mentioned these punishments in imperial biographies, just details among others. Same tone he used for banquets and campaigns. Tacitus recorded slave punishments in his annals without moral commentary. Historical facts like tax policy. Seneca came closest to discomfort in his letters. Servus emoines. They are slaves. No, they are human beings. But even Seneca never called for change. He expressed philosophical discomfort and continued living in a society built on their suffering. None of them demanded these practices stop. They documented, criticized, satirized, but accepted them as unchangeable reality. The lesson isn't that Rome was uniquely evil, but Rome was uniquely efficient at institutionalizing it. They built systems around cruelty, infrastructure, documentation, bureaucracy. They made human suffering routine. When clerks process human suffering like grain shipments. When citizens watch horror without objecting, evil becomes normal. Everyone had a reason. Everyone had justification. No one felt responsible. When suffering becomes official policy, civilization crosses a line it can never uncross. So that's what Roman historians recorded about women who tried to escape. Not Hollywood's version, but what Seneca, Tacitus, and Suetonius actually wrote. The Colosseum still stands. Tourists take photos. But underneath that sand, history whispers a different truth. Rome conquered the known world, but it never conquered its own darkness. If this disturbed you, hit like. If you want more secrets books hide, subscribe. I'm Crown and Dagger.